Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode with Serious Mike. Today, like all great ideas I have, this one came out of arguing with people, so that's kind of fun. I was arguing on the internet. Usually nothing good comes out of that. But while I was arguing on the internet, I realized that the more I argued with people, particularly in the realm of politics, I just started wondering if people really have any idea what they're talking about. So today, I decided I was going to do a civics vocabulary lesson of sorts. If you hear all these terms on the news or your friends are saying it, what the hell does it mean? What is a plutocracy? What is Marxism even? What is egalitarianism? Or what are some of these other ideas that we have out there? Where do they come from? Why do we say things like right wing and left wing? If this is something that's interesting to you today, then I guess that's where we're going to go. I'm going to take the chance, do something a little educational, a little fact-based, and see if we can't at least get ourselves into a better place of using language in a way that it actually makes sense to us. Because if we're in on this discussion, we don't know what these words mean. What are we really arguing? Are we just arguing against words that we think are bad? Like when we hear fascist, do we just assume Nazis? And so we just think that we're talking about Nazis. Like, that's kind of the thing that happened. I was arguing on Quora with somebody asking why the left today was calling was weaponizing the term fascist against the right wing, and it hit me like nobody knows what the hell these words mean, and so I guess I'm going to do my part to try to fix that today. We're going to talk about these concepts. We're going to go through different types of. We're going to go through the difference between a political or governmental construct versus an economic construct. We're going to talk about where some of these constructs are, some of the ways we group them and talk about them. Anyway, I guess we'll go ahead and start getting into it. I think the first thing that comes up interesting in this conversation for anybody that doesn't know is the terms right wing and left wing. There's going to be a thing; those are going to be things that I'll probably talk about. They're part of like the definition of some of the things that go on. And what do we mean by left wing and right wing? Well, it turns out during the French Revolution, it had to do with they were at a national assembly, and people who believed in one ideology sat on the right side, and the other people sat on the left side. And so we have categorically used this as a way to speak about politics ever since then, because that's where it came from. And I'm not here to say one is right over the other. I believe what I believe, but we have history to tell us what else is going on. But I think it's important that we understand these terms so that we aren't just making assumptions. When we're talking about somebody being a fascist, that doesn't mean Nazis. Nazi ideology is a specific kind of fascism, but all fascism isn't necessarily Nazi-esque in nature. And that's one of the things I wanted to clear up. So, when we talk about the right wing, it has to do with those that sat on the right side of the room during that French Revolution, right? Right wing is usually into tradition, hierarchy, and preservation of the existing social orders. They want things to remain unchanged, and they do want a hierarchy where there is somebody in charge. This is where you start getting into some of the more extreme right ideas, where you actually want a singular person in control, like dictatorship, totalitarianism. We'll get into talking some of those later because we don't want to use words that we aren't familiar with yet. But those are all associated ideologies. The right wing likes a hierarchy. The right wing tends to seek tradition. They want things to be limited in how they say. That's where we get this as opposed to the progressive mindset. A progressive mindset would want changes. They want things to move forward or to be structured in a way that we have a future or we have changes coming. The right wing tends to fundamentally just resist that. The left wing is usually more the reform. They are looking for social change. They want things to be different. Most leftists would believe that our current society is treating people unfairly and differently. And that's usually a very, very big left wing idea. So if we look at that, it's the people that want hierarchy, structure, order, and rules versus people that want fairness and equity for all. Like, if you really broadly, distinctly do that, that's what it is. And when you put it like that, it doesn't really make one better than the other. It's not necessarily that these are right or wrong and that the ideologies have anything inherently evil about them. If you believe that a hierarchy is necessary for functioning, well then that could make you lean right without really believing in the extreme ways of doing it, without needing the force, without needing the demands that we often see with these types of things. Excuse me. And so that's what we mean by right wing, is we just see people, we see the hierarchy, we see the structure, we see social structure, we see social order. The right wing is going to believe in that order, and that hierarchy is necessary in order for anything to exist. And that the problem becomes is that a lot of times a leftist will see that hierarchy as automatic oppression. And in the way that we've used it historically, most of the times when we have any type of hierarchy, those that we deem as more high on the hierarchy tend to do oppressive things toward the others. And this is an observation that the left has. And what's very interesting about that is right wing seems to make sense, right? We're children, we see the need for order, we see the need for rules, and then when we grow up, we don't know how to change that. We don't know of a better system. Like, I don't know that there is a better system than a hierarchy. We do operate pretty effectively like that in the world. If we have a boss, or if we have leadership, like, we humans seem to value leadership a lot. And so there's a validity to noticing that. There's a validity to not knowing a better way of doing it. Liberals still notice the oppression. They notice that how that results in oppression, that it results in unfairness, that results in the people that are lower in the hierarchy feeling like they have less of a say than those at the top of the hierarchy. And fundamentally, that starts breaking when we start talking about concepts with like egalitarian. Like, egalitarian would be the belief or ideology that all are created equal, that all are the same, kind of like what we said in the Declaration of Independence here in the United States. And with that, we want everybody to hold the same amount of power if we're egalitarian, or somebody that would be egalitarian would really want everybody to hold the same amount of power. And these are pretty important concepts underpinning the rest of it, because as we go through and talk about this, when we talk about right-wing and left-wing ideology, and we talk about things like egalitarianism, we're literally just boxing the idea of what it is that we think it should be, or what flaws we notice in a given system as we implement them throughout history. And that's one of the greatest things about the Discord, is there are reasonable things to both sides. We do work better in a hierarchy than just as like an ad hoc. Like, we don't work like ant colonies do, where everybody just kind of seems to know their job and they figure it out. If there's a boss in an ant colony, well, I don't know, there's queens and things of that nature, but is that truly, are they truly some type of egalitarian type society? Or does it just look that way because we don't know any better? We haven't been able to sit down and have a conversation with the queen to figure out how it all works yet. I don't know. But there is a validity to the realization that we have, as a long time, worked in hierarchy. And what would happen if we tried to dissect that hierarchy? Well, we get things like, there are other countries that have done this. When we try to deconstruct this, we end up with the way that socialism or communism plays out, and somebody still ends up rising to the top. There still ends up somebody that breaks out of control. And I guess this is one of the things, we'll talk about this in a bit too, like Karl Marx, he talked about the inevitability of the breakdown of society because of the hierarchy, because of oppression. And that was one of his beliefs, is that it's inevitable to end up in a left-wing ideology, because eventually the people are going to get so oppressed, and there's going to be more that get oppressed than the non-oppressed. This is my understanding of it. I haven't actually read extensive Karl Marx, but I've looked at it because I've wanted to know these definitions. So I've looked into it some, so I think I'm right on most of this. But I think you should do your own research. Like, don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody else's words for it. In fact, I'm using AI heavily. I might just be accidentally lying because I'm trusting AI more than I ought to. These are concepts that I think I know enough about that I'm relatively confident that the things that AI are telling me are correct. But you know, everything's a problem today, trying to figure out, you know, how to get this information. So, now that we've talked about that, let's get into some of the ways that we have different political and governmental constructs. And I'll mention some of the ways that I've seen people misuse these, or kind of point out how they're different than the way that sometimes we use them, or the way that we respond to them, or at least I've seen people respond to them online. First is democracy. We all think we're familiar with this, but this is one's a kind of a subtle catch. Like here in the United States, we are kind of a democracy, but we're not. Democracy isn't the most specific thing to us. We're a democratic republic, which I don't actually have in the list. I have democracy and republic separate. We'll talk about it, what makes a republic different than a democracy. But a democracy is the people have a vote, and everybody's vote counts the same. And that vote then goes on to control the decisions that we make as society. Well, that sounds kind of like what we're doing until you realize that it's not exactly what we do. We don't vote on issues. We don't vote on laws. We don't vote on individual things. Instead, we elect people. We vote to elect people. So that's where the democratic portion of our democratic republic comes in. But the republic is then a representative government. So you send people from, that represent you in your region, in your area, in your state, in whatever it is that the government sets out. You have a representative that represents the interests of you and your people and the people in your region. And then they go off and they vote on laws. They vote on what the government actually does. And it's mostly hands off for us between those election cycles. Occasionally there's like some state constitutional things that go out for popular vote to change the Constitution, things of that nature. But for the most part, we elect representatives. Representatives go to the government. They do the governmental thing, and then we all decide if they're doing a good enough job, and we keep them in or we vote them out. So that's what. So the difference between a democracy is the people are voting on everything. The republic is representatives are chosen. Democratic republic is the combination of the two, where you democratically elect your representatives, and then those representatives actually are running and controlling the government for you. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm not sure that that's something that we all know, because I've heard people call, the United States a democracy over and over and over for as long as I've been alive. And knowing that that's not exactly what we are, well, it's a forgivable difference. It's close enough that we kind of know what we're talking about, but it's also different enough that if we're trying to have a nuanced conversation about politics, it's not always good enough. And sometimes using a precise definition is better in trying to make a very complex point. Next, up on the list of governmental constructs, we have authoritarianism. Now, authoritarianism is defined by a concentrated political power to a single authority, or sometimes a small group, but usually it comes down to a single authority. The group ones will kind of get into some of those later. Authoritarianism also likes to limit political freedom, so it likes to hold power by silencing opposition, or it likes to interfere with the opposing ideas to exist. It's kind of characterized by suppression of opposition, but it doesn't always have to be there. And there's different forms, right? Like that's the thing, right? Like if a government is truly shifting between one and another, they're going to kind of have all of these things. Like some people right now in the United States think that there might be something slipping in this direction because in this last presidential election, since then, there's been a lot of firing of people that were not necessarily political appointees, but they were fired for not, agreeing with the current administration enough. And that's kind of a new thing for us in the United States. We've always had these career apolitical positions, like prosecutors are a big one. A lot of our legal system, a lot of our regulatory bodies. We try to get as many people in there that their job isn't politics. Their job is to understand the rules and execute on the rules as they exist. We don't really want people trying to push an agenda within the workload. We want that to come from the elected officials and then everybody else just doing the work toward it. Well, if you start getting rid of all of the people with one side of ideology and you start allowing people to push one type of ideology as if they're trying to change the rules as an administrative person or a bureaucrat that is working in the government just trying to do the work the government needs to do, how is that going to affect things? That's the kind of thing that starts to shift when an administration tries to start taking on more concentrated power. Is that what we're really seeing? Are we really headed toward authoritarianism? Well, I don't know, man. You guys be the judge of that. You guys can watch the news. Not that I guess if you're here, chances are you're a little more interested in fact than most people, because I don't know. I guess I was a little nervous about doing this episode because nobody cares about facts anymore, and all I'm trying to do is talk about facts. So when you're watching the news, just know what all these terms mean. And when you start seeing things, you'll be able to start applying the test yourself. Does this qualify as this word that they're using? And that's what we're looking for here. So when we hear authoritarianism in the news, it's because we have people that are noticing the way that the government is being fired selectively, or people in the government are being fired or removed selectively because of their political affiliation, because they will or won't go along with what the administration does. Those aren't usually things that can get you removed from those kind of thing. Is that authoritarian? Well, it looks authoritarian. So the people who call it authoritarian, they have a little bit of a foundation, if that's what's going on. I don't know. I'm not sitting in the walls of the Department of Defense. I don't know every person that's been fired. But if they're reporting on this, being that, they are trying to keep mostly people that agree with them and will do the work that they want done, and the people who are just trying to do the work of the government fairly are being forced out because they won't do different things, it does seem like you're trying to change the way the government's always worked. It does seem that way. And so that's where we get into hearing authoritarianism. Then we hear that, well, that's inflammatory language. Well, if that's inflammatory, if you don't want to be called an authoritarian, why would you keep doing things that look authoritarian? That's not really inflammatory. When you just call a duck, it is a duck when it looks that way, right? We all understand that. Maybe it's not a duck. I don't know. I don't see under the covers. I haven't dissected the duck, so to speak. So what I really know, I guess that's limited, but it sure looks to me authoritarian in nature. Next, we have totalitarianism. Now, totalitarianism is extreme authoritarianism. It is just like, it would be like, I suspect this would almost be like monarchy in some respect, where totalitarian is you are looking for somebody to take absolute control. They probably are seeking to control all aspects of public and private life. This was like Nazi Germany. This was like Stalinism. This is where there's a lot of propaganda, there's surveillance, there's a lot of threats, virtually extortion. So are we in that? Well, I don't know. I don't think we're really into authoritarianism yet. I think there are authoritarian tendencies being shown. So I don't think we're anywhere near totalitarianism yet. I think that's going to take some time. I mean, even Germany took, 10, 15 years before, there was a really secure point for, Hitler to do what he did, to rise to what he did. So I don't think we're at authoritarian or totalitarian. Well, I think we're flirting with some of those concepts, but I don't think we're there. I don't think we're just all is lost. We're in an authoritarian government now, but there are some tendencies that are showing up. And then there's dictatorship, which is probably like again just another singular person in charge. So this would be authoritarianism, where it's definitely all down to pretty much a single person. That person doesn't really have anything that we would call a check and balance, as we would say in the United States with our Constitution. This is usually something that's held by force, very, very loyal people with very, very high power in the government and military. And control is held. There are lots of things that go into that. As far as that goes, like, this is like North Korea style stuff. Like, there's one guy, opposition gets disappeared, or, bad things happen. Like, there isn't really any dissent that's ever really acceptable, and extreme measures are gone to do that. Now, if we move on from there, we go into fascism. Now, this is about as far right as you get. You need the absolute order of the military. This becomes very, very national. It's very, very it's almost becomes like a virtue to be patriotic. Like, patriotism becomes a virtue. It's one of the most valuable things in fascism. Fascism is all about loyalty and loyalty tests. And the military hierarchy, highly all prized and valued in fascism. There's also active suppression of the dissent, and the state is supreme over individuals. Now, what's interesting about fascism is that fascism is an ideology that attempts to control society at large. It's a little bit different in authoritarianism, because rather than, okay, we all bow before dear leader, like North Korea. Fascism is a little bit more, we bow to the nation, we value the nation, and all of this. So when we get back to like how I was arguing with somebody about, is the left weaponizing fascism, the term fascism? Well, the problem is here's the facts. I told you it's what, highly patriotic. Well, right now, our current right-wing party in the United States, their slogan is "Make America Great Again." They've literally been on this patriotic rant that is weird ever since Trump started running for office, ever since he got into politics. There was no hiding that. Now, patriotism in and of itself isn't bad. It's just very interesting that's there, and that's coming from a group that it seems to be going further and further right in the actions that they take. There's also the strongman leader. It's not that Trump has claimed absolute power. There's still a delegation. Like, his cabinet members are still, independent. If he was totalitarian, they would not be allowed to speak without absolute permission. Like, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, dictatorship are the absolute, like, you're trying to run this from a singular point or as small a source point as possible. It's hierarchy all the way up to that one person. That one person is the absolute boss. Like, authoritarianism is be like mob mentality, right? Like, you answer to the person ahead of you, and only the boss really has the ability to make anything that's called a big decision. But in fascism, it's still a system. You put the idea in place, and you do give autonomy to some people to carry that out. The military would have some autonomy. In our case, ICE would have some autonomy. ICE has autonomy to do a lot of things in our nation. They've been given a huge budget, and they're the huge federal law enforcement present, going out and enacting violence against people, sometimes against people that they have no real reason to enact violence against, people that are citizens, people that are not here doing anything wrong or illegal. If you think about it, what's going on right now with ICE is they're just walking up to people that, I don't know, uttered a word that sounded like they might have an accent from another language, and then they start doing papers checks. And if you don't produce the right paperwork, well, who knows where you're going to end up? We've got alligator Alcatraz out there. Like, we're on the human rights watch list because some of the stuff we're doing with, deportations of the quote unquote illegal immigrants, that not all of them are illegal. There are people that are doing the process right. They're going to their court dates. They're trying to immigrate properly. They're trying to be a part of the better country. They see the country is better than wherever they came from, and they're doing their best to participate and follow all the rules. And they're being arrested in front of their children. They're being taken out from their court dates, or when they're going to see the social workers that they're required to check in with and whatnot. I mean, that is an ideology of autonomous people going out and carrying out a way of making the society conform to whatever that ideology is. And right now that ideology is that, I guess, all of our problems are being created by immigrants. And so we're trying to get rid of the immigrants. And it does sound like fascism to me. So this deportation by force, the papers checks, the military displays, the strong leader doing strong unilateral things to, for whatever reason he wants to say, these are all hallmarks of fascism. So I got news for anybody out there who thinks that fascism is just a rhetoric right now. Stop doing fascist things if you want to stop being called a fascist. Stop using force to papers check people. And maybe you won't be a fascist anymore. But if you think that a paper check is just normal, that's not in this country. We have the Fourth Amendment. We have the right to be secure in our papers, possessions, effects. In this country, we've time-honored the tradition of you need a probable cause to be able to search somebody. You don't get my ID until you've seen me do something wrong. And that's not where we're at. And that's where the idea that fascism comes in. So I know I focused a little bit on fascism, but that one does seem to be uniquely applicable to what's going on today. It does seem to fit. There are authoritarian tendencies being presented, but I think the overall picture fits fascism better. But I think they're both a little bit present. And I also don't think we've lost our democracy, our democratic republic yet. I don't think all is lost, but I do think that there are these different flashes of things showing through. And I think to have a fair, reasonable conversation about that, we have to talk about the facts, which, as days go by, I become more and more concerned nobody cares about. So then next we have another one that seems to be prevalent, and this can really overlap with the others because this is more about who controls it, but it's what we call oligarchy. The oligarchy is ruled just by a small elite group. We usually refer this to the people that are rich and have the wealth because they can buy the time and influence to meet with those that are in charge, who have the leaders. And one of the things that happens with oligarchy is you're practically living in a world where it's just bribery now. Like it's beyond legalized bribery. It's that bribery is how stuff gets done. Money moving is just how everything gets done, it seems, in an oligarchy. At least that's the practical application of it. But yeah, that's where we just decide that everybody sitting at the table gets to be the rich elite, and they get to sit at the table and they get to make all the decisions, and the rest of us are left to just do as we're told. And in this case, it does look like through fascist methodologies that are going to come after us. They're going to try to take from us things. Like, I mean, even the force used through the court system to threaten like media outlets that are just trying to report. The White House has made several threats against several, lawsuits against several media companies, and have gone a real long way to try to stifle or stunt the speech, which again, that's that suppression of dissent that we talked about in fascism, the suppressing of other ideologies that comes through suppression. And this is all being done and chosen and controlled through and by those that we would consider a part of the oligarchy, or the people that are the elites that are in charge. The truth is our current system, if you're outraged by what's going on in the United States, I would say that the oligarchs are probably our biggest threat right now, because they have a source of power that is outside of the government, and the government just chooses whether or not to enable what they do or don't do. And so the oligarchs right now have more freedom because we still have a working check and balance system in this country. We still have a court that is monitoring what the rules are for the president, what they can and can't do. Well, what's interesting about that is who controls what large corporations do, rich people do. Well, that would be the law, right? Well, see, what happens when the law isn't equally enforced across the board and people who have power are allowed to do whatever they want, then that actually makes their power outsized because they're no longer subject to the rule of law like everybody else is. And this is where oligarchy gets really, really, really frightening to me. But I'm not saying we're at that point. I'm just saying we're at a point where it's starting to look like that could be a thing we're going to have to deal with soon. I don't know that we're there. I mean, in some sense, rich people have always done what they wanted because, well, catch me if you can. And then they're rich enough to, buy their way out of it by, whether it's, through good legal defense or through other things like bribing their way out of it. I can't say that some of the really weird pardons that we see coming out of the White House, I can't say that I don't think those are just straight up bought because, well, the Supreme Court has said the president can't do anything illegal during an official duty. They've put clemency as an official duty above reproach, and anything to do with that is completely out of line. As a matter of fact, I want to say one of the rulings, or maybe it was one of the dissents, basically said this ruling legalizes bribery to the president for pardons. Like it literally absolutely blankets. If you want to pay the pardon, the president for a pardon, the law, there's nothing that can be said or done about that in our law, I guess. So that's frightening, right? Because that means that one person can choose to not enforce the laws against any person or group that they choose. And they can do so for any reason they choose, corrupt or otherwise. And so are some of these bribes? Well, I don't know. Let's see what happens. Diddy gets pardoned. I bet more than anything that would be a bribe if Diddy gets out of prison and pardoned for his crimes. I'd bet anything that money transfer was part of that. I don't know, but I won't be there. I won't see it. And I won't have any evidence to back that up. That's just an opinion or what looks like the obvious answer to me. So beyond that, we got monarchy. I think everybody understands what a monarchy is. That's a single person who rules everything. They are the person that absolute power. And in some cases, I guess there are constitutional monarchies where there's some kind of limitation. Like this would have been like when the Magna Carta came out. The Magna Carta was the first document that had the first rights of what we today take as like due process or habeas corpus or rights to a trial, right? Like the Magna Carta was kind of a limitation on the monarchy that the monarch had to agree to, basically under duress because the people were revolting. And that's kind of where the Magna Carta came from. And that's kind of where common day like law stems from. That was kind of some of the first ideas in due process rights and the right to defend yourself and the right to a fair trial that isn't just a railroading by the government who has near absolute power compared to you or nothing. And so that's part of when monarchy started, maybe falling out of favor or at least having some kind of restrictions where that monarchy couldn't just, do anything on a whim. Then we get into the theocracy, which this is a government that's run on religious authority. It may believe that, it's a God king. Like you see a little bit of this, like in with like some of the authoritarian totalitarianism. Like I believe in North Korea, like dear leader is revered to be a living God, is my understanding. And so there's a component of religion or reincarnation or something a lot of times in the leaders when we're dealing with a theocracy. I don't know that we're dealing with this in the United States so much, but there is a bit of the notion of Christianity that's being thrown in with what we're doing. So there is a little bit of religion or a little state-sponsored religion. There are places in the United States that are attempting to resurrect some of these ideas and challenge some of our ideas of separating church and state. But for the most part right now, our system is handling this just fine. It is doing just fine, keeping like something like a state-sponsored religion out of it. But we have a lot of Christians believing certain things about how society should go, that they are present. I just don't think that that's outside of normal. We've been arguing about religious freedom versus separating church and state. Where does religion belong in things like school and other state-sponsored activities? Like we've been wrestling for as long as I can remember, and it doesn't really seem to be uniquely different than it's been at any other point in my life. So I don't think that this is really a huge part of the discussion of what we got going on in the United States right now. And then of course we got aristocracy, which is this is kind of like oligarchy in a lot of ways, but this is where it's ruled by the privileged, where there's like a noble class or a noble hierarchy. Usually you're born into a class and that's that. I think aristocracy is just a more generic thing. I think oligarchy probably fits what we're doing better. Wealth is usually the card to get in. But there are certain like back channels or family ways, like, there's a little more crony-like to get in. So aristocracy is in there somewhere. But again, like these aren't all distinct, unique things. They're just different ways of specifying the way that these play out. So some of these do have considerable overlap, like aristocracy and oligarchy definitely overlapped. Authoritarianism, totalitarianism, dictatorship, monarchy, all kind of have that kind of a single or tiny group of really important people that are really doing whatever they want. So there's a lot of overlap. Now, the other thing you haven't heard yet is the things that we talk about is like the economic constructs. And so this is, you know what? There's a few others. Hold on. That's not all. Another thing that we're dealing with that may be as much about oligarchy, it's just that the super, super rich of the super rich tend to be in technology. And so technocracy is like the rule by technical experts, scientists, and engineers. So there's this idea that if we really, truly wanted to be the best, we would put our best in charge. And they would be the ones to do that. Like the idea of this would be like the last thing. This would be the idea that we try to do that. Now, in the United States, we've sort of kind of tried to do that. We've got like central banks. We've got like the EPA. We've got these different regulatory bodies where we give a tremendous amount of power to technical experts. But that's all actually kind of coming undone. And so what degree of technocracy we've had, to what degree we've tried to move in that direction seems to be falling apart right now. Like we've had massive changes at these regulatory bodies. Our Health and Human Services director is an absolute fucking joke, in my opinion. He's literally had fucking brainworms eating his brains, and now he's telling us that cutting some foreskin off causes autism. The guy's a fucking joke. I mean, this isn't even about politics. The guy just isn't smart. He doesn't know anything about health or humans or knowledge or science. And we've got him in charge of the entire country's Health and Human Services Department. It's completely wild to me. And he has no idea what he's talking about whenever I hear him talk anyway. Another thing that we talk about, like an extreme form of like the oligarchy, would get into something like a plutocracy, right? We've got where the government is by the wealthy. The whole point of the people with power is the money. And so you actually have more power by having more money in a plutocracy. And so this might be where like we may have had elements of this past actually active more, like back when representation rights of the country, and we had the 2/3 compromise, right? Like the 2/3 compromise isn't what most people think it was. It wasn't that we allowed black people to vote at 2/3 of their voting power, which is how I've heard a lot of people tell me they understand it. The real understanding of that is for purposes of representation, how many representatives you get, they were counting slaves as 2/3 of a person to up the amount of representatives they got. So in the South, where they had, like if you had a farm and you had your family of like 10 people, but you had 50 slaves, your property would actually count as though you had about 40 or 50 people there, because 50, whatever the math comes out, 2/3 of 50 is that 35-ish, something like roughly. And so you've got your 35 plus your 10. So you get 45 people. It counts as 45 people when you're selecting your representation. And so you get more representatives, which means that when it goes to vote at the, within the halls of Congress, you have more representatives that believe what you want, but you didn't let your slaves vote to earn those. So you actually have outsized power. Before, when we had the 2/3 compromise, slave owners had an outsized value to their vote because they got to vote on the behalf of 2/3 of the people that they basically owned. So owning people, not only did it give them free labor, and an advantage in all those ways, it also gave them more power to vote. And so I would say when we were operating under the 2/3 compromise, that we had plutocracy actually in there, because we had people that actually having money, having the specific resource of slave ownership, meant that you had more value in your vote than anybody else did. And so then there's another form of government that very well could be going on right now. I think this is probably the most characteristic thing that's going on in our government right now. But this is kleptocracy, and this is rule by thieves. So this is corruption. Leaders are mostly interested in enriching themselves, either through exploiting the flow of the money or outright embezzlement. I don't know that there's a lot of embezzlement. It's just that I think that there's a lot of what they said was influence peddling when, I don't know, Biden was office. They were influence peddling. But like we have this plane from Qatar that is being given to us. It's going to cost us $1 billion to fit this into an Air Force One. We spend it. The luxury that the president travels around in is unbelievably advanced. Like, to anybody that doesn't know, you can't just take a normal plane and turn it into Air Force One. Air Force One, it has to be a flying fortress. It has to be capable of defending itself. So it's got weapons. It's got all kinds of defense weapons on board at all times, so that anytime anybody did anything under threat, it has onboard capacity to deal with that all on its own.
So, weapons we all know are expensive, crazy expensive. Defensive weapons, the best weapons in the world to protect the president, of course, are what we're going to put into there. But not only that, just in case of whatever could be going on in the world, every contingency is planned into Air Force One. There's surgical suites. The president always has a surgeon on board Air Force One whenever that plane takes off. There are people designated to be there so that any emergency, any eventuality can be handled, no matter what it is. If the world was to go to war, if the president were to ever get injured, they would not take him to a standard air hospital where he was a sitting duck. They would put him in a plane to do surgery. That is how highly contingent and protected our experts are. And so this is where kleptocracy comes in. So another government gave us, quote unquote, $400 million airplane. Well, is that really a gift when we're going to have to spend $1 billion to put the defense into it, to put the surgical suites into it, to put all of the things in there to keep every contingency that we need for our president on track, available, and ready to deploy at any second's notice under any circumstance? That's what we prepare for as the United States. We are the best at military war and protecting people. And you better believe everything we have is put behind the president. And so that's going to cost us. So what? The president just accepts a gift and the U.S. has to spend $1 billion on that? There was no congressional vote on this. It's even against the law. The Emoluments Clause prevents the president from even accepting gifts from other nations without congressional voting to allow it. And yet here we are. So that's why I say I think the kleptocracy is alive and well. There's all the Bitcoin crap or the crypto coin crap that these guys are doing. The president sells something new every fucking day. It seems like there's a new, like, he's selling Bibles and shoes and, he sells his own gold coins. He's got his goddamn hero card collections or whatever they are. Like, there's all kinds of shit. He's just literally fucking selling us garbage, and he's using the platform of being elected president as his free marketing for it all. It's fucking wild, man. So I think kleptocracy is, I think we've left the rails on that one. I think right now everybody's just in free for all, get what they can while they can. We all know the crisis of the politicians that are selling us out while they fucking trade on the stock market. It seems like there's an awful lot of Republicans that know when Trump's going to or not to chicken out on tariffs. God, it's wild. All right. And then just for completeness, we've got to get to my favorite government system of all. Now, it's my favorite because I think it's the perfect government. I also think that we as humans can't handle it yet. We don't have the ability to understand egalitarian principles, to care enough about one to each other. We can't manage government without some kind of force backing it. And that, of course, is the system of anarchy. Now, I am not an anarchist. I believe that anarchy is the highest form of government. I do not think we are high enough beings capable of operating under anarchy. It would be a disaster. We would take control of each other. It would be complete lawlessness. But I do think that if we all had our own sense of the social contract, of the golden rule, of literally valuing cooperation in each other, I think if we could actually embody the totality of egalitarian, then I think anarchy would be just fine. We are not there today. Anarchy would be a disaster, and it would probably send us back to the Stone Age if we tried it. But maybe one day we'll give it a go. Who knows? Maybe we'll be that awesome one day. I sure hope so. So that kind of takes us through the government systems, but there's a lot of things you haven't heard. We haven't talked about capitalism and communism and all these other things. Well, these are economic systems, and we're going to get to those because these are more about how the money works than how the government works. And so one of the interesting things is that because we have like countries out there like Russia that we've known as communist or socialist, or China, we think that this is a governmental system, and it's not. It's different. It's an economic system. But they try to focus on this because, well, if you're trying to control a bunch of people, why wouldn't you tell them that you're trying to do something more egalitarian? I mean, that's just what we do as humans, is we try to feed you one thing and tell you it's something else and expect you to just go along with what we're trying to force down your throat. It's kind of how we work, but that's kind of how that's how I see it anyway with some of these characters. So I guess without further ado, we'll get into these economic systems now. So, first one, capitalism. This is one that if you're in the U.S. or whatever, you probably understand this. This is where private ownership reigns supreme, property rights are protected and upheld. Competition, innovation are all supposed to be what makes it go. It's supposed to all be individual enterprise, and the motive for everything is profit. So we go, we compete, we try to innovate, we try to be more efficient than each other, and at the end of the day, more dollars means more win. The problem is that it depends on convincing everybody to buy crap that they don't need. We all have this crap that we don't need because, well, capitalism. Somebody somewhere wanted to make a product. They found a good way to make a commercial, and in a bad decision while you were watching a commercial that's exploiting some psychological weakness, we go out and buy crap that we don't need. It results in consumerism and materialism, where we end up just buying things for no other reason than it felt good, or we're trying to keep up with the neighbors, or we're trying to do what everybody's doing, or we're trying to fit in. All concepts that are just exploitations of what we are as human. But then you go on from that and you turn it into, the, well, I forget where I was going with that. It's, but so there's a lot of problems with it. And then it gets even worse in like, I think one of the greatest problems that we have today is probably something I want to go back and a lot of you are going to have a problem with this, but I'm going to go back, I'm going to pin this all on the back of Reagan. This trickle-down economics bullshit, this getting rid of the capital gains from 75% to 15%, I would squarely say is one of the reasons that our capitalism is so out of control today. We had some checks and balances. We had some things that restricted the most unfair things that billionaires had to deal with. We had restrictions on that. We had ways of limiting that. But ever since we uncorked that, we've had what, 2 minimum wage increases since Reagan, something like that, at the federal level. Wages have just been stagnant. Our government's trying to kill things like unions because apparently unions are a threat to businesses. And I don't really understand what the big deal is. Wouldn't a business be better if it had more people working hard for it that were, loyal? Well, the problem is that our current day capitalism is so late stage and most corporations have gotten so big and so much of the profit has been extracted out. The only way to get more profit without doing more is to find a way to turn the labor force into slave labor. And this is one of the criticisms of capitalism because we have different stages of capitalism. It was working well for us a long time. We used to have controls and things in place. We removed all those and now it stops working in a way that's reasonable and fair. I don't know if capitalism can be fixed, but I know it's not working for a whole lot of people in the United States today. And that's no fault of the people who are stuck in the system. It's kind of also no fault of the people who know how to do math and decided to run the math in ways to just, screw everybody else because I'm going to get mine. And I guess that's my criticism of capitalism is that in an unrestricted capitalist environment, it encourages criminality and it encourages exploitation. It's almost necessary for it to work at this point because it's been that way for so long that anything less just isn't profitable enough to actually exist in the system as it is today. So then beyond that, we have socialism. Now, this is the idea that collective or public ownership of everything major is in order, and it's to solve the problem of distribution of wealth. It's to solve if the government owns everything profitable, then no single person is in control of all those resources. And so the thought is those resources end up more evenly distributed because of that. This is it does vary. It depends on how it's done. Like Scandinavia, it's a democratic socialist type of a system, whereas Cuba's more of a state socialist thing, where the state kind of decides what public property is compared to the people deciding what happens with public property. I mean, there's a big difference in that. And there's also going to be a big difference in how it's implemented and how fairly it is distributed among the people that get to control it. There's a lot of ifs in socialism that I don't know that we've necessarily flushed it out. See, and here's the problem, like, right? We can criticize all of these all we want, but at the end of the day, we have humans that are corrupt. We have humans that want to corrupt every one of these systems. So most of these systems aren't inherently good or evil. It's what we do with them. And it pretty much seems no matter what we do, we find a way to corrupt and kill it. Now, that isn't to say that we don't have times where it goes well, but that only lasts so long, and that just seems to be a human it seems to be the human element that fucks it up. Because in the United States, capitalism was working just fine. When we had minimum wage that was fair and people could eat, when we had controls on how large companies could get, and we actually enforced some of the antitrust laws before we got into, the 70s and 80s, and companies started just being universally huge all the time. We had times that were economically pretty good in the United States, but what a lot of people don't like to talk about is a lot of that came from exploitation of lesser countries. We decided to use our wealth instead of manufacturing it ourselves. We decided to taunt little lesser developed economies with slave labor. This is why we send everything out to China. China was a developing economy when we started outsourcing everything over there. Everything was cheap. We had, just so that they could get people working, they would take our garbage and manufacture it without much question. Well, that worked out well until, then they started hitting a capacity. They only need, so much work before they have enough work. Then they get to start dictating, and they get to start upping their wages. And then because we stopped manufacturing it, when they start raising their prices, we have no choice. We don't have our own factories to compete with them anymore. So now they have it. And China did all of this as a socialist country. Their government owns pretty much all their big corporate things to some degree or another. They control them to some degree or another. And they exploited us exploiting them. And it's kind of wild to think about how that all went down. At least that's what it looks like to me. It looks like we tried to exploit China because they had cheap labor. They had more people than they knew what to do with. They needed to find a way to help their people eat. They needed a way to get money coming into the country. And so they just stole everything that made America great. And it's not even that they stole it. It's they just agreed to accept the gifts we couldn't wait to give them. And we're so short-sighted. And so we just gave all of that power away. And now we're stuck here going, what do we do now that we don't have any of that power? Now that, well, there's a lot more going on with that that's going to make that a lot worse. But it's interesting how that's going to go down, to say the least. And when you don't manufacture any of your own stuff and you've been exploiting the other countries for years, I don't understand why we'd get up and start tariffing everybody. That doesn't make sense. It's like we just got up and started punching all the people we were exploiting for no reason. I don't understand it. I don't know why we literally crap on the people we're exploiting to make us rich. It's wild to me. Anyway, I guess that's a little off topic. Got a few more of these to get through. We got communism next. Communism. This is an idea where the society is of all equals. So this is pulling in the egalitarian notion of being classless. There isn't really a society where you're not really supposed to answer to the state necessarily. This is supposed to be that the actual group itself owns everything. What's different than socialism is because government controlled or centrally controlled is different than communally controlled. And so that's the difference here. We're talking socialism to communism, right? Socialism is public ownership. The group owns that which owns the things. So it's still government ownership, but it could be under a democratic system, or it could be under something else. Whereas communism is the people actually own the things. There isn't really a concept of private property, is my understanding. And I guess what the truest form of communism would be thinking about a commune, right? If you just had a bunch of hippies living together in their little mud huts doing gardening things, and they all just lived off the garden, and everybody got to live pretty much the same, and everybody just had to work pretty much the same. That's the truest form of communism. And one of the problems we notice with communism is that nobody's in charge then, and this goes back to the problem I was talking about earlier with can humans work without a hierarchy, without somebody in charge? And so far, we don't really have a communist society that doesn't really have somebody in charge. So this is kind of still an idealistic thing, or a very, very small scale thing. It doesn't really seem to work well at the level of like a government or a state. And anyway, so I guess that's communism. And then Marxism, this is, if I understand Marxism right, Marxism is more of the observation that socialism or communism are kind of inevitable. Like if I understand Marxism right, it's not really even advocating for anything in particular, other than noting that capitalism just seems to always fall apart, and you end up with a larger group of people who get screwed than the group of people who are in control, and that always means that there should be a fundamental shift to something like communism, because the masses will demand it. Well, okay, it's an interesting theory, I guess, but the problem I guess a lot of people have with Marxism is that it basically is saying, if you're not looking to tear down capitalism violently so that you can just get to socialism, then, well, what the fuck are you even doing other than wasting time? And so it's actually kind of funny to me because, like, we have these, there's another word that I don't think I was planning on talking about, but we have accelerationism, which is a belief that is out there in some circles that the best way to deal with society right now is to actually accelerate the decline. So actually make it worse, go through the whole capitalism thing, let it all fall apart, and then we'll start picking it up and rebuilding it now that we understand all these lessons. Well, that's a terrible idea, but it's funny because you usually hear that from people who are right-minded thinkers who are against Marxism. But to me, accelerationism just sounds exactly like what Karl Marx spoke of. I don't know. Take it for what it's worth. I've not read enough to say that I know for sure what Karl Marx's ideas are and whatnot. I just, my AI overview wasn't very helpful, and so I'm kind of going more on memory than what I think is, going on here. But yeah, it does say that he did push that there was an inevitable revolutionary transition towards socialism or communism. So yeah, eventually the people are going to pick up their pitchforks and go, hey, what about us? And then you have the Marxist revolution type thing going on. Another one that I haven't heard about in a bunch, but it just sounded fascinating. I guess it was in here in my AI overview that I had it pop up for completion. And that's mercantilism. And this is the idea. This is more colonial expansion. This is back into, we should be going ahead and allowing monopolies, basically let capitalism go to extreme, completely unrestrained, and do everything through as much control as you can exert, whatever leverage you have, use it and go with that. And that's what mercantilism seems to be like. I don't know. It's not one I'm familiar with, not really something I've heard of before, but wanted to include it. So, as we go through and talk about this, remember this in today's world. I have noticed that a lot of people do not know what any of these things mean. And so when they're calling each other this, I think it's probably true that some people are weaponizing some of these terms against each other. I also think that there's truth in it. If somebody wanted to call me a Marxist, I wouldn't say I don't believe in this accelerationism, and I don't think that all hope is lost and we need to burn it to the ground. That being said, do I see the wisdom in noticing that the longer a system goes on out of balance, the longer or the sooner it's going, or the longer it goes on out of balance, the more likely it is that you're going to have that tipping point where you have enough people to rebel against the system and burn it down. And I think that that's what I understand is the wisdom out of what Karl Marx said. I'm not saying I'm a Marxist. I don't know. I don't want to burn it all to the ground. I really would like to avoid that if we can. But it is observational that eventually the people get oppressed enough that they're going to stand up and do something. And if there's one thing we know about history, there's no amount of force that really beats numbers. When you start getting to the points where you're 10 to 1, 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1 on when you take up sides in a conflict that's coming, the math is overwhelmingly in favor of the people who have numbers over the people who have technology. Being technological, having money, having the weapons isn't a thing that will help them if we get there. And I'd rather avoid it altogether. But I do think that the more people are abused, the more people are oppressed, the more likely it is that those of that oppressed group is going to stand up and demand something different. And I think that that's what Marxism is. So I don't know. To date, I don't really think we have a long-term example of working capitalism, socialism, or communism. I don't think we have that. I mean, even some of the empires that lasted the longest in all of history, hundreds of years, still had falls because of, economic problems in one form or another. And there's so many reasons that governments have risen and fallen, but at the end of the day, it's still all our fault. No matter what it is, these aren't economic systems that were created by like somebody else. We weren't told to do these by somebody else. We use these systems all around the world every day. One of these systems is in play somewhere, everywhere. And at the end of the day, when they fail, that's our failing. And what can we do to actually do that? Because I'm not here because I want you to have the latest name to call your opponents. I'm here because I want you to understand the current terms. I want you to understand the systems. I want you to understand what does and doesn't make these different systems work. What does and doesn't, what kind of problems do and don't exist. What can and can't be done. Understanding where it is so that we understand where we want it to go, so that where we have the power to vote, we are making votes because we actually understand the language. We actually understand what's going on. Because I think that we have a huge gap in that. Well, anyway, we've been at this a while. I'm pretty sure I've worn out everybody, including myself, on the topics. Even I'm like, okay, I need a breather, need to step away to something else. And that's okay. We're all going to have our lines. We're all going to have our limits. But, hopefully we're all a little wiser today. And hopefully we can treat each other with a little more respect going forward. And hopefully we can find a way to get ourselves through this mess we've created. Anyway, with that, I wish you well.